Fallout 3 is known for its vast arsenal of weapons and various ways to fight through the Capital Wasteland. But there is a weapon that only a few care to cram into their Pip-Boy inventory and use regularly to burn their enemies to piles of ash. Hello my friends, my name is Frog, and today we aim to find out the question, can you beat Fallout 3 with only the flamer? At this point, you're all used to having an overabundance of rules that basically make every video a multi-challenge run. You may be disappointed to hear that for this video, there are only 2 rules, and that is only using the flamer as my primary source of damaging my enemies, and of course, the use of glitches and exploits are not allowed. With all of that out of the way, let's begin. Being born into the futuristic equivalent of prison with extra steps, I began designing what I would inevitably grow up to be. Seeing as this entire run was inspired by a single frame of The Simpsons, I thought it would be fitting to create my character in the spirit of Hank Scorpio, and also take on his namesake. While my dad maxed out the child neglect skill tree, I decided to invest in my own perks to ensure that I'd survive just fine without him, removing all of my points from strength and luck because this wasn't a playthrough built around trying to make it through high school without being bullied. I maxed out my endurance to help with the big gun skill, and also maxed out my intelligence to help with those sweet skill points. With my life flashing before my eyes, it was already my 10th birthday, and the Overseer gave me my first and only Pip-Boy because he obviously believed in the concept of child labor. Grabbing all of my presents, I watched the robot destroy my cake, which made me feel a little bit better about the prospect of AI taking over humanity. I then beat up Butch for trying to take my sweet roll, and headed down to the lower levels to grab my BB gun. At this point, you're probably thinking you failed the challenge because you used another weapon, and to that I say, no you, because this was a scripted moment, and everyone knows that what you do before age 18 doesn't count anyway. Now 16, I was tasked to take the goat to determine what I was forced to do for the rest of my existence. Thankfully, I didn't need to take it because I already was the goat, and Mr. Broch acknowledged that real recognizes real. Investing into big guns for more damage, medicine for higher healing, and repair due to the general lack of flamers in the game, I left the class and blinked another 3 years into the future like an anime time skip. Amada managed to wake me up from my 3-year coma just to tell me that my father had gone completely batshit insane and escaped from the vault. Wanting to follow in his footsteps, I chose to do the same and began my jailbreak. Because I couldn't attack anything just yet, I thought it was best to turn into an absolute loot goblin, grabbing everything I could get my hands on to sell later. Letting the guards be killed by the radroaches, I had to laugh because the fact that trained personnel could be eaten alive by a bunch of cockroaches that were smaller than anything we had in Australia was downright hilarious. Speaking with the Overseer, it appeared that he and my father didn't have anything in common simply based on the fact that he actually cared about his child, as he handed over his terminal password the moment I threatened to hurt his daughter, and after reaching the exit to the vault, I was free to take on what was left of the world. To get this challenge started, we needed one of 2 things. We could get extremely lucky with our loot rolls and hope that a flamer just spawns in an abandoned toilet somewhere, or we could go to a location that's guaranteed to have one. The only problem with that second option is that it's being used by an enemy, and since I couldn't actually attack yet, I needed to get my hands on a follower. Doing a loot run through Springvale Elementary, I avoided the raiders in there as best as I could and snagged up everything I could see. It didn't exactly stop the raiders from getting a few good shots on me, but with my pockets full, I departed the school and stopped by to speak to Silver a little earlier than intended. I didn't know who Moriarty was, but she didn't know that, and she handed over me the 300 caps, which was a nice little boost to my funding. Selling all of my items to Moira, I was close, but not close enough, so I went back out into the wasteland in search of some more junk to sell. In my ventures, I narrowly avoided death, and somehow found myself over at the Arlington Library. There were a ton of burnt books in here, and while they don't sell for much, there were enough to make up for their lack of worth. Crossing the threshold I needed, I had my 1,000 caps, and got ready for a long journey ahead of me. Sneaking through DC and avoiding the enemies that dwelled within, I marked a few places on my map that I'd need later in the run, and arrived to where I needed to be. Convincing the old patriotic man that his robots would be better off in my hands than his, he was all too happy to take my ill-gotten caps. I now had what I needed to get my flamer. Moving towards my location, I'd never felt safer thanks to my robot defending me at every corner, which worked wonders for conserving my heals. Finding the mass relay station, my mechanical friend knew what needed to be done and wasted no time obliterating everything in my way. Heading inside, I raided the raiders, observing as they were turned into radioactive piles of green goo, and with the last raider falling, I got my hands on my coveted flamethrower. With his job done, I dismissed my follower and returned to Megaton to finally set this challenge alight. Offloading the last of my useless stuff to Moira, I went to the saloon to meet Moriarty. Apparently, he was on holiday and couldn't be seen anywhere, so I spoke to Mr. Burke instead. And what kind of villain would I be if I disagreed with his plan? If Moriarty wanted to waste my time, I'd waste his life because fair is fair. Moriarty finally arrived and offered to tell me where my dad was for 100 caps. After I agreed to this, he changed his price to 300 caps, which I decided to pay, but only because I planned to blow him to kingdom fucking come. Walking back through DC again, I quickly noticed that ammo for the flamer was extremely hard to come by, making this run even more difficult. Fortunately, I knew a small cache of flamer gas existed, so I set out to find it and ensure I wouldn't be caught with my pants on fire at the wrong time. Becoming everyone's favourite Ninja Turtle, I entered the sewers into the underground metro station. This place was riddled with ghouls, and because I had no ammo, I was again back to being unable to attack anything. However, this wasn't my first rodeo, and I breezed through after a few deaths. Heading underwater and reaching the end, I absorbed a bunch of radiation. Still, I wasn't too worried, because if there's anything the Simpsons taught me, the only negative side effect of radiation poisoning was glowing bright green. Looting the cache, I now had over 250 canisters of Bernie Hot Maker, which would be plenty to last me. Setting my opponents aflame, I turned the metro tunnel into a crematorium, and I left to actually focus on the main quest this time. Setting ghouls alight and consuming their flesh, I trudged through the tunnels, with my only light source being my flames. I eventually caught up to the Brotherhood of Steel, only this time, I didn't need them to carry me like I carried my Fortnite squad. Firing away at the mutants in my path, they barely stood a chance as I threw the best Outback barbecue known to what was left of humanity. Leaving cinders in my wake, I arrived at the entrance of GNR, and got ready for the big boy behemoth. The green Bigfoot took way more damage than I anticipated. Dancing around the flames, we battled, and I tried to conserve as much as I could with VATS. After a long fight, I emerged victorious, but not without taking a massive hit to my reserves. I was confused about the fact that I was having a hard time finding ammo for my weapon. I mean, we were in the US Capitol after all. Heading inside and speaking to 3Dog, he told me that my dad had been through here. Still, he was being stingy with his information because nothing in the wasteland comes for free. Offering to tell me where my dad was in exchange for fixing the radio tower, I left to do yet another redundant story quest. Because I knew I'd struggle with the museum, I set out to find more ammo for my flamer. Making a quick detour, I knew there was an area where a raider with a flamer would always respawn, and where there's a flamer, there's ammo. Entering the Bethesda offices, I realized the only reason they had a flamer here was because Bethesda does nothing but drop straight fire, so I got to work. I spent over an hour killing, looting, and waiting for respawns. I didn't end up with many canisters, but I decided it would be enough to get me through the museum, and I made it a problem for future me. Fighting my way through the tunnels below the city, I was extremely conservative with my flamer, only attacking when necessary. Unfortunately, almost every enemy thought that making my life a living nightmare was a necessity. By the time I reached the museum, I was extremely low once again. Now inside the Museum of Technology, I chose stealth as the optimal strategy. Sneaking around, I only burned mutants that actively detected me to prevent the rest of the cavalry from being alerted to my presence. This for the most part went off without a hitch, and I secured the radar dish, leaving the building with some ammo. Installing the dish, I returned to Galaxy News Radio and got the information that I needed. 3Dog informed me that my dad was hiding in Rivet City, so I turned my attention there. I was more excited about the gun store in Rivet City than I was about meeting my father, because unless my dad had flamer ammo, I wasn't interested. Going for a midnight swim in the irradiated water, I arrived at the giant boat and spoke to Madison. She was much more willing to give me the information for free, and she informed me that the Jefferson Memorial was my next destination. Before heading off to the memorial, I couldn't be bothered heading out to find more ammo, so I did what every RPG player does, and cheesed the system. I waited outside Rivet City for days at a time, staring off into space, and making the NPCs around me extremely uncomfortable by standing in a single spot for an entire week. I was, as the kids say, built different. Doing this allowed me to amass many more canisters, and once I was comfortable with the amount that I had, I left for the memorial. Being able to actually have some fun this time, and not worry about running low on spicy juice, I wasted no time in making my claim to flame against the mutants that sat outside. Burning them all, they really didn't stand a chance against me and my pyromania, and I reached the purifier to find my dad's location in Vault 112. Walking across the wasteland, plenty of enemies wanted to take me on but failed to do so. After roasting rad scorpions alive, I entered Smith Case's garage to become a friendly neighborhood mole rat exterminator. After that was done, I got ready to jack straight into the Matrix. Tranquility Lane was easy as always, since I couldn't attack anything without my weapons, so I chose the easy way out and activated the failsafe. The lack of authentic American patriotism always made me nervous in the simulation, and now I understand the reason why is because this place was a communist breeding ground. Freeing my father, he told me to meet him in Rivet City, so I left and headed back towards the boat. Speaking with Lee and my father once again, he explained that we needed a GEC to get Project Purity up and running again, so I met them all back at the memorial to get things started. Tasking me with clearing out the memorial like I didn't fucking do it the first time, I got to work on creating a burn-off. Forging my way into the memorial, I rained fire on those in my way and ensured no other mutants were hiding. Letting Dad know that the area was now clean, I escorted him inside, and he asked me to do some maintenance work, which seemed easy enough. Fixing the pump generator and replacing some fuses, I went to turn on a valve, and this is where the Enclave decided to strike. Rushing back throughout the memorial, I scorched every Enclave soldier who wanted to catch some smoke, looting them for all their precious power armor. Arriving back at the center, Colonel Autumn flexed his Sigma mindset on my father, going as far as killing a fellow scientist to get him to hand over control of the purifier. With my dad killing himself in a last act of child neglect, he let his problems become mine instead, and I attempted to escape, following Dr. Lee into the sewers below. Inside the sewers, I was angry, not at the fact that my dad was dead, but the fact that he didn't leave me any flamer ammo in his will. I used this fiery anger to set my enemies ablaze, not sparing any victims in my glorious crusade. Removing any presence of the Enclave soldiers and feral ghouls in the area, I gave the doctor a bunch of stimpaks to save Gaza as well, because I was a villain, not a monster. Exiting the tunnels, we arrived at the Citadel, and we began planning our next attack. Conversing with Scribe Rothschild, I asked him where I would source a GEC. For the sake of plot convenience, he told me that I'd find the answer I sought in the archives, so after becoming the perfect hacker man, I found the location, Vault 87. Now with a clear idea on how to follow in my father's footsteps, I went outside, got trained to wear power armor for some extra defense, and left the Citadel behind me. Running low on ammo once again, I made a quick stop in Rivet City to replenish my hot sauce supply. While doing this, I noticed that a radiation suit was up for sale, and I decided to grab that for later as well, just in case I ran into any problems. With my munitions now restored, I departed for Little Lamplight. Lighting my way through the darkness, I turned a robot into a pile of hot metal, and after a while, reached the Cove of Kids. Choosing the child at Heartperk earlier made getting into the area easy, even if I was called a mungo. Mayor McCready guided me through the town, and dropped me at the entrance of Murder Pass, where I was ready to meet my next obstacle. Making my way through the murderous path was easier than expected, as the power armor I learned to wear gave me a massive advantage in my defenses. That doesn't mean it wasn't too easy, as I did have a few close calls from the mutants who didn't know why they were attacking me. The path was now free of murderers, because we know if you murder a murderer, they cancel each other out, and Batman is wrong. Approaching the entrance, I stepped through the door of Vault 87. The inside of the vault was quiet, which honestly made me much more nervous. It wasn't long until many mutants reared their ugly green faces, but I had enough canisters to bake some mutant pie, and I kept moving on to get more jump scares. Stopping to drink some delicious gross water to conserve stimpaks, I took on the vault. I speedran my way through, fighting everything in a mighty blaze of glory. Finding Forks locked up, I debated whether I would free him, and chose not to. Maybe I was a monster after all. Spotting the entrance to the GEC path, I put on my radiation suit, chugged down enough Radaway to cure cancer, and ran down the path to retrieve the creation kit. With the kit now in my possession, I left Forks and the vault behind me, only to be sideswiped by the Enclave. Like the actual government, they let citizens do the dirty work and then take the credit for it. Waking up in God knows where, Colonel Autumn demanded I tell him the code to activate the purifier. I'll admit I was a little more concerned about the glaring plot hole that was him surviving the radiation-filled purifier a little earlier. Still, I told him, for lack of a better word, to go fuck himself. With him being called out of the room, the president freed me, I grabbed my things, and I got ready to fight with my oversized blowtorch. Stepping outside the door, a guard immediately stopped me, but that didn't prevent me from reducing him to a pile of ash. Following my route, an Enclave soldier got really confused and almost completely ignored me before noticing that I wasn't meant to be out of my cell. Dealing with him, I ran as fast as possible through the base, fighting plasma with fire at every turn. After many trials and tribulations, I finally made it to the president for a long conversation about what the fuck was happening. It told me that the world needed to be cleansed, and to shut him up, I agreed to his plan, took the FEV out of his imaginary hands, and told him what I was told a lot in high school, to go and kill himself. The base was coming down all around me, and I moved as fast as possible to escape. Leaving Eagle Rock, I watched the explosion cover the sky with glorious results. Doing another ammo run before the end, I restocked everything I needed for the last stretch. However, I had one final thing to do before my journey ended. Travelling back to Megaton, I planted the bomb I told Burke I would earlier, went over to Tenpenny Tower, and made good on my promise of blowing Moriarty to high hell. The man had lost his life over 300 caps, and I felt good about it. But there was only enough room for one villain in this wasteland, and I dispatched both Mr. Burke and Tenpenny for their atrocious acts against the people of the wasteland. Tying up my loose ends, I left Tenpenny Tower behind me and fast-tracked straight for the Citadel. The Brotherhood had one last trick up their sleeves to take back the memorial, and that was the true epitome of American pride in the form of a giant-ass laser-shooting robot. We charged into the fray, backed by the massive hunk of steel and the entire Brotherhood. The battle truly was glorious, with helicopters falling from the sky and Enclave soldiers being nuked to pieces. Following the robot closely, I took cover from all the damage that came my way, eventually reaching the memorial and entering for the final stand. With my flamer, I boiled human flesh inside of its own power armor and singed my enemies, enjoying their screaming. Entering the control room, I resorted Colonel Autumn and his cronies to smouldering remains that no coroner could identify. Stepping into the purifier, I entered the code, and I had proven that you can in fact beat Fallout 3 with only the flamer.